Hello everyone, my name is McGaddis and welcome to the fourth installment of a video series of the lock classes for Gloomhaven 2nd Edition. I'll be continuing the lock classes with circles today, sometimes known as concentric circles, a class I very much enjoyed in 1st edition who my wife is currently very much enjoying playing in our 2nd edition run. It probably goes without saying, but the remainder of this video ahead will contain heavy spoilers for the circles class. So now is the time to turn this video off if you don't want to be spoiled on the information surrounding this class. If you're looking for videos on the spoiler-free starting 6 for Gloomhaven 2nd Edition instead, I have a playlist put together for my video analysis of those classes. This video will function more of a review of this class, as I have not yet myself played this new version of Circles. So my discussion will be more theoretical based on my experiences playing the class in 1st Edition, and comparing their kit to what is now available in 2nd Edition. I have a lot of experience with circles in 1st edition, and found their core mechanic to be very enjoyable to play and master over time, and the core identity of this class remains unchanged in 2nd edition as well. It's played very well in our group for us, and I look forward to giving it a spin myself when my wife does retire it. Okay, spoilers for this video are starting now. The spoiler name for circles is the 8th Sir Soul Tether, and was previously called the Summoner in 1st edition. They, as their previous name implied, are a summon specialist class, wielding with the highest number of summons, as well as the most varied types of abilities on these summons. All of their summons do remain losses, as in the previous version, so positioning and understanding of how summons and monsters will move and around is important for playing this class. Both their hand size and health pool totals have changed quite a bit from the previous edition, even if their overall theme has not. So they've gone from a 9 card hand to a 12 card hand in 2nd edition, so a massive boon to flexibility, although not necessarily as much to stamina as you might expect. They also went from a medium health pool starting at 8 at level 1 down to a low health pool of 6, although this is more minor as there is reasons for this change. So let's tackle the hand size total first. Any class gaining 3 cards to their hand size is absolutely head turning, so why the change? So similar to Spellweaver, the Summoner in 1st edition had a card called Unending Dominance that allowed them to recover 4 cards from their lost pile, of course with the cannot be recovered icon to avoid infinite loops. Unlike Spellweaver, Summoner wasn't expressly built around this ability, or at least not to the same extent. And as you gained levels, there was a chance you'd want to cut this card for other cool cards you were gaining, or perhaps you didn't even consider or understand the power of this ability until you'd played some time with this class. Without it, you would exhaust very quickly, as you were expected to play multiple summons most of the time, and as they're all losses, you would go to something like a 7 or a 6 card hand very quickly. This led to awkward situations where the class was very glass cannon in nature, either swiftly demolishing scenarios when things lined up well for you in your summons, or perhaps you ended up exhausting very quickly or needing to use Unending Dominance to kind of build back up, so in a very precarious nature there. The 9 card hand plus Dominance essentially stifled build diversity and choice, as you were very much locked into playing 8 cards plus Dominance, essentially regardless of your level. There were a few tools at extremely high levels, I think it was level 9, but between 1 and 9 your options were very limited, aside from Unending Dominance for card recovery. The other awkward part of the design of the class was that Dominance had a super cool and fun summon top action that you would use less than 5% of the time, as by using it, not only did you lose the card, going down to an 8 card hand, but you also lost your card recovery method and would quickly exhaust as a result if you had to summon anything else or if the golem from Unending Dominance were to die. These kind of abilities where they essentially are traps to use are not generally conducive to fun decision-filled games, and therefore the new version is far superior in my opinion. With the 12 card hand size, you have 3 extra cards in your hand size to account for this loss of the card recovery ability, and you can choose to run any cards you'd like at any level without feeling like you're pigeonholed into one card throughout your career. While I do think Spellweaver does pull off this risk versus reward of being built around a central card very well, having another class in the same game with a less focused version of the same thing feels a bit out of place, so I do welcome this change to Soul Tether in 2nd edition. Their health total from medium to low health is much simpler to explain, as first edition summoner needed to stay right next to their summons for many of their actions, including commanding them to attack or move, and often giving them buffs at fairly short range as well. So they needed the higher health pool as they were expected to essentially be in the thick of combat alongside their summons in first edition. These range restrictions have largely been removed, with only normal abilities requiring range such as attacks and heals, and typically these are at range 3 or 4 hexes away now. Therefore, a low health pool is more suitable for this class, given the increase in stamina this class has generally received due to the bump from 9 to 12 cards. It does get muddy in terms of the stamina portion when you consider the recovery of dominance giving back 4 cards, but it is a lot simpler to have stamina on this class now, as you won't have a point where you have something like 3 or 4 cards left and need to unending dominance this turn, or else take an unlucky hit or two and exhaust before recovery occurs, which does happen sometimes with reviving Ether on Spellweaver. As far as mechanics and strengths go, the Soul Tether summons have a great variety of abilities, some boasting negative conditions to apply to enemies, positive abilities to apply to allies, shields, retaliate for themselves, pierce, elemental generation, curses, etc. One unique change I would like to highlight is that some of these summons have no implicit attack ability on their character mat, and instead apply a negative condition, such as muddle or poison. As your character mat here calls out, they acquire a focus as if they have a single target ranged ability, and they disregard a disadvantage from adjacency rules, and ignoring all monsters that already have the negative condition that they apply. This is such a fantastic change for this class, and really anything that gives summoners some semblance of like smart targeting or control over the summons helps a lot, as sometimes they are held back by following monster AI even if it won't benefit them at all. The Soul Tether's other abilities are primarily supportive in nature, having reasonable access to strengthen, healing, and even invisibility for their summons and other defensive measures to keep their spectral armies alive and kicking. They also support a few ranged attacks themselves, applying a few negative conditions and some access to push as well for tactical play, keeping monsters away from your summons and things like that. Another interesting facet of Soul Tether is the fact that they infuse and consume fire, dark, and wind in small quantities on some of these actions. However, these summons also do often infuse the elements as well. In an interesting twist, they actually don't necessarily consume the elements from the summons, but instead the summons have some sort of a passive ability that is active for as long as that element is strong or waning. You do still have some abilities as the Soul Tether themselves to consume these elements, so it creates a very interesting tension where you either have a choice to consume the element for your own action or keep the element around to keep these buffs up for these summons that need them. So far, we've found that the summons that utilize these elements have been quite strong, as there's cool combinations you can do with items and even other classes to keep these elements around long term for maximum benefit. Soul Tether's mobility is fairly limited, with no access to moving 4 hexes or more without any elements present at level 1 to consume. However, roughly half of these movement actions are teleports instead, which give a lot of flexibility to move past obstacles, traps, wall hexes, and even moving while immobilized. These initiative control is fairly reasonable for Soul Tether. Definitely skewed towards the later half of the initiative and going very slowly. This is actually often called a summoning style initiative in the 90s to 100, like 90 to 100 range roughly, as you often want to summon these very late in the round as possible to avoid any errant hits before they actually get to take their actions first. Initiative weaving, summoning late, and then having your summons go early in the next round is a very common tactic. But the biggest piece of the puzzle will be protecting the queen, figuring out how to keep these summons alive as long as possible for maximum benefit, as they essentially are giving you a free small action each turn. This will often require coordination and teamwork with your allies, so communication is very much key with this class. All right, after that fairly lengthy introduction here, let's finally dive into some cards. First up, we have Bonded Might. This is the first command style card that we're going to see. We're going to see quite a few of these. This one grants one of your summons a move +0 and an attack +0. So based on the stat sheet found on the summon itself. This allows you to fully control the summon performing the move and attack abilities. So this is important for repositioning and to make sure your summon is hitting the right target in combat. These are often used to shepherd a summon to the periphery of combat, ideally killing the target or setting up an ally to do so, to avoid having your summon take too much damage. Commands are vital for any summoner style class, and this one allowing both a move and an attack action here is ideal, as some only offer one or the other. The one experience for doing so here is nice that you'll see on essentially all of your commands, as this class actually gets a bit less experience than I'm used to overall, as the summons now give one experience when deployed instead of two. So I actually have to use your commands throughout combat to kind of make up that difference. Initiative at 61 here is quite poor, as you'll sometimes want to command slowly in a round in order to wait for the monsters who have already acted before sending in your summon, as of course they do also act on their own turn directly before yours. But many times you'll want to command quickly in a round to essentially double attack a monster and send your monsters to safety, basically move them to the side, kill that target between their own attack and your command, and then there isn't ideally any other monsters near them. In either of these situations, 61 is unlikely to be your leading card, as it doesn't help guarantee any of the above occurs. Bottom action here is our first instance of elemental consumption. So first you can consume the wind here for move 2 and 1 experience, and then afterwards you can always perform a loot 1. Overall, this is a pretty vanilla action, especially without the wind, of course. This is just a bottom loot 1. This is definitely below par without the wind. Bottom loots are much harder to utilize than top loots, of course, because you already have to be in the right position. Your ability to both generate and consume elements is fairly minimal at early levels, especially without perks. Although the wind is both the easiest to make and use for a benefit at level 1. My biggest issue is that the move 2 doesn't necessarily make this card into something incredible anyways, as some classes get a simple move 1, loot 1 without any need for elements. And one of your best summons, in my opinion, at level 1 wants the wind present as much as possible. So overall, I like Bonded Might primarily for the top, but I find its initiative and bottom action here hold it back from being a premium card. Next up, we have Burning Passion. Top is a strengthen 2 targets within range 4, and this infuses the fire. This has been a simple bread and butter action that you'll often throw at one of your summons, plus usually another ally, or perhaps even 2 summons, depending on the situation. This will add to your party's damage through the advantage that you're bestowing on them, especially as you gain levels and perks, improving your attack modifier dex, and also creating one of the 3 elements that your class cares about. This in particular gets quite good at level 4, when you gain access to a summon who gives the party ranged retaliate as long as the fire is present. Overall, this has played very well for us as a card, as we've always had an area attacking mercenary in the party, so our Soul Tethers often use this buff to strengthen our hardest hitting minion, plus that mercenary. The range 4 on this also makes it quite easy to use, and in a pinch you can even strengthen yourself if you plan on attacking this round. The strengthen plus the fire is actually perfect for the next card we're going to be looking at, so in that case you'd likely want to strengthen yourself as one of the 2 targets. Initiative at 12 here is very nice for the top, but honestly is super vital for the bottom, as it is a proactive defensive ability that needs to go up before the monsters act in a round. This is one of only 2 fast initiatives at level 1 for you, as you won't get one faster than this until level 6. So this would be already pretty solid for that number alone, but also has a great top action, so the rest is really gravy here. Bottom is negate the next source of damage one of your summons would suffer this round, and it's a round bonus. So this is, of course, just checks against the next one hit that would hit a summon, but many of your summons are such low health that they generally die in 1 to 2 hits anyways. So this is really good to put up on a turn where your summons engage the monsters, and where they're more likely to get through unscathed as a result, especially if you're not confident your summons might be able to kill the target. This is particularly strong if your summons are, again, at kind of the edge of the periphery of combat and not in the thick of it. As if they're likely to take a solitary hit, this negates that, but this doesn't do anything against a barrage of attacks, so keep that in mind. Next up here we have Burning Tether. Top is an attack 1 range 4 wound, and by consuming the fire, rather you add a target and gain 1 experience. This is a reasonable payoff for having fire available, as your payoffs for fire are quite limited until level 2, and especially at 4, as previously mentioned, with a summon that needs it. With that being said, you only have 2 ways to infuse fire at level 1. So it's pretty much only a combo with Burning Passion's top that we just looked at, the double strengthen, and the bottom of one of your summons that might be in play. So you will need to sequence accordingly to make this work. It is nice that Burning Passion strengthens while making the fire, so you can strengthen yourself, as mentioned, if your plan is to use this on your next turn. With the fire, I quite like this, as double wound sub chip damage of flipping 2 modifiers is quite nice for a level 1 card. Without this, this is definitely below par and just okay against low health monsters. Initiative at 43 here is similar to Bonded Might 61, poor and generally not great on this class, as summoners definitely kind of live and die by their ability to sequence initiatives well for their current situation. Bottom is one of our clean, simple teleport 3s with an enhancement pip to bring it up to a teleport 4. This is your strongest movement ability at level 1 if you do not have any element to consume, which means this may be necessary to bring in at level 1, depending on your other choices on what to cut. If you are running the bulk of your other move and teleport actions, I don't think this card is necessary to run, as neither half is critical for the average Soul Tether in that situation. Next up here, we have Ethereal Gust. Top grants 2 of your summons a move +0 and grants 1 experience. A move command is definitely the weaker half of general commands that give both. However, this is fantastic in 2 general situations. Moving summons out of harm's way that have just put themselves in danger at the beginning of your turn, or between rooms to have your summons keep up with the party until they can move themselves once the next door is open. This is the kind of card that will feel mopey in some situations in a given scenario, but is an absolute all-star in probably like 1, 2, or maybe 3 particular rounds of a given scenario and may end up saving your summons from death. So it is something very important to have in your back pocket for those situations. And even just moving 2 summons kind of to the edge of combat after they've already acted before you is also a fine use for it as well. Initiative at 14 here is essentially the same as Burning Passion's 12, so a very fast, desirable number, and also works well at the top command here to kind of get out of dodge for your summons. I would highly recommend running both fast cards here at level 1, so this and Burning Passion, and honestly for quite a few levels on this class, as your only cards that go before this come at higher levels, particularly at level 6. And the rest of the initiative cards that go fast are kind of more of a medium fast, so in the 20s or even approaching 30s. So these are going to be very important for you early on. As if your summons die, you are pretty much just a normal person with very few abilities that are necessarily going to be relevant in a given situation. So you really do need to focus on keeping those summons alive. Bottom here is a move 3 that infuses the wind. Like Burning Tether's Teleport 3, this is one of your most consistent move actions at level 1 in terms of distance, and you get to make an element on top of that. So you're essentially trading the flexibility of Teleport here for a free wind infusion, which is great for a couple of your cards, but also, as mentioned, my favorite level 1 summon on this class. This action will often be used when the top isn't ideal in a rest cycle, and moving and making a key element is always really nice for elemental focused classes, and these always play better than they look as well. Next up here, we have Forged Ferocity, and this is our first summon. So this is Summon Iron Beast, who comes with 7 health, 2 move, 1 attack, and then implicit 1 shield, as well as 1 melee retaliate. So definitely, as the name implies here, this is your most defensively minded summon at level 1. This is a really nice stat line for a level 1 card. The summon is an ideal frontline to help protect your other summons, as it has enough health and shields to survive a couple of attacks, and then he'd be healed back up by you or your allies to keep on kicking. The combination of low attack plus retaliate means this will often just kind of flip a modifier on its turn and do like maybe a point of damage or so, and it'll actually sometimes deal more damage on the monster's turns due to the melee retaliate. While this is tankier than your other options early on, it still only has 7 health and 1 shield, so you'll need to play smart and work with your allies to keep it alive long term, as your other summons will fold pretty quickly a lot of the time without him. They're kind of there to kind of take the bulk of the damage. Um, Sometimes you'll also just need your allies to take a hit or two to keep your summons alive. That's a very normal thing with classes like this. Initiative at 37 here is actually quite odd for a summon, as it's not early enough to want to use in combination with its bottom ability, but is also far too fast to be used safely as a summoning initiative either. I would definitely recommend pairing this with a slower card when summoning the Iron Beast, often in round 1 or 2 of a scenario. Bottom of this card is strengthen one of your summons and then infuses the fire. Honestly, hasn't really been used much, as the top of this card was vital up until about level 5 when our summoner got a card that effectively replaced it, and then she retired this card from there. It strengthens any one summon, so it doesn't have a range restriction at all. Um, it is reasonable for a bottom action as it gives a small damage bump and makes a key element, which is definitely nice. But again, the biggest mark against it is simply the fact that we were often summoning the Iron Beast either on turn 1 or turn 2 of most scenarios, as it felt like it was a pretty important way to keep your other summons alive and therefore providing value for the party. Uh, Next up at level 1 here, we have Living Night. So this is a reprise of a previous summon as well from first edition, but this one definitely saw a lot more play in first edition than the previous version of Iron Beast, who is pretty weak. So this summons 2 Shadow Wolves. So these have 2 health, 3 move, 2 attack, and pierce 1. And then whenever a Shadow Wolf dies, you infuse the dark, and all Shadow Wolves, the other one in this case, gain invisibility. So this has actually been nerfed since first edition. It lost both a move and a pierce, so it had 3 health and pierce 2 in the previous edition, but honestly that's a more than fair nerf, as this was a very dominant summon in first edition, but it was also a very catch-all summon because of the pierce 2. It could effectively deal damage to almost anything and scaled so incredibly well with levels, despite being a level 1 card, that I don't recall ever actually cutting this card in first edition. I think I might have at level 9, but like it was something that I carried with me through the vast majority of my career. So now it is more of a high risk, high reward card, losing the health and the pierce. The 2 health do mean that these guys essentially fold to any one attack, barring something like a null or a curse drawn. So this is something where this is a lot of damage if you can keep these guys alive, but they are going to die at some point, as it's just kind of a reality on a summoning class, barring some very lucky and very strategic play from you and your allies, often sacrificing yourselves to keep these things around. So overall, I do find Shadow Wolves are still a good summon, but they are not as omnipresent as they were in first edition. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. The 3 move here makes it so easy for them to find a target, and I do appreciate they kept a little bit of Pierce, as it is kind of it's a nice ability for summons to have. This new ability where when they die, they infuse the dark and the remaining Shadow Wolf gets invisibility has been very nice and works even better than you might expect. As even if a monster has something like a multi-target ability, if they attack and kill the first wolf, the second one turns invisible immediately. And so the second one won't even be targeted by the remaining multi-target because they're not even there anymore. Initiative at 96 here is a great classically late summoning initiative. Works pretty well for the bottom as well, as it's something you'll often want to set up with another summon towards the end of a round or between rooms. So overall, this is a strong synergistic initiative for both halves, of course, because you typically like to summon if you're using the top half as late as possible as well. Bottom half here is on the next 2 attacks targeting one of your summons. The attacker gains disadvantage for the attack and suffers 1 true damage after the attack, and this happens twice, of course, and notably it also infuses the dark when played. This is something that we started off not using a ton because we were often using the top at lower levels, but as we gained levels and had other options for damaging summons, we ended up using the bottom half more, and we are still playing this card even up to level 6 when my wife is playing it currently. The bottom half pairs really well with any sort of damage mitigation for your summons, including things like Ward and Curse, to really try and make this disadvantage go the distance and keeping your summons around. The true damage also adds up over time, and the Dark Infusion is something where you don't initially use it a lot of, but as you gain levels on this class, you'll get more and more options that either want the Dark to be consumed, or even a summon at high levels that just wants it present. So overall, Living Knight has two very strong halves, as well as a very synergistic initiative. Um, this is probably one of the hardest summons to use if you aren't familiar with summoning classes, because the 2 health really does make these guys essentially fall over to anything. So if you're not comfortable, you're going to have to learn to lose summons at points, and you do have one card that allows you to rebuy them as well. But it's definitely going to be a bit of a learning curve keeping these guys around, but it's definitely worth it if you can. Whereas the bottom half is a nice stable way to keep your other summons around and alive. So it works very well with the Iron Beast that we saw as well. So overall, definitely a staple action for I think pretty much any level 1 Soul Tether. Next up here, we have Mighty Bond. So the top here is going to look very familiar to the very first card we looked at in this analysis video. Grant one of your summons, move +0, attack +0, giving 1 experience. So the same command action. However, critical mass of these kinds of actions is very important for any summoner, so they'll be good for Soul Tether here as well, as you'll often want to command your minions multiple times per rest cycle. Since the top actions are the same, the initiative in the bottom action here will likely be more of a deciding factor once it comes time, to cut one of these cards. So definitely recommending at least 2 commands at level 1, if not more depending on your playstyle and choice of summons to focus on. Initiative at 51 here is one of the few numbers worse than Bonded Might 61. So neither of your attack and move commands have a good initiative at level 1. As mentioned before, this is almost always going to be paired with a different leading card to either go faster or slower, depending on what the situation calls for. Bottom here is a teleport 2. If you consume the dark, it becomes a teleport 4, giving 1 experience. This swings from your worst move action to your best, depending on your ability to infuse and therefore consume the dark, and is the only non-lost card you have available at level 1 that actually consumes the dark specifically. A teleport 4 is huge value, so this is definitely worth it when things line up. And of course, a teleport 2 isn't really far removed from your basic move 2 offered on any card, so this will be pretty poor if you cannot infuse the dark at all. You do have perks that help you infuse all 3 elements, so I'd recommend taking one early on at least that lines up best with your build, as there are often hefty damage augments on the perks as well. They're all +2s, and then give you a choice of 2 of your 3 elements. So for example, if you really like the dark and wind consumptions early on, you can take the +2 that gives either dark or wind. Um, Overall, I do like Mighty Bond here a bit over Bonded Might, as their initiatives and top actions are nearly identical, and I prefer a teleport 2/4 in a vacuum over a loot 1 that is sometimes that comes with a move 2 before it. As mentioned, I think many Soul Tethers will probably play both at level 1 anyhow, so this distinction mostly only matters as you level up and need to cut cards, or if you want to run every other command at level 1 and want to cut one of these 2, that would also be fine. Next up, we have Planar Protection. Top is a simple disarm within range 4. No enhancement pip here is very much unsurprising, as it's already sufficient on the range, and tacking any negative condition onto the disarm is probably too free and powerful for a level 1 card. This is a simple way to keep your summons or allies alive in bad situations. Typically for a normal class, a disarm that doesn't do anything else for a top action isn't necessarily ideal, as you are spending a large portion of your kind of action equity on a top action. So unless you had something like a bottom attack, you weren't really contributing to the round, you were just kind of stalling things out. But for a summoner, this is definitely more powerful because you are still providing value through your summons every turn, even if you yourself are just stalling things out. One of the biggest issues with this card overall, at least for the top half, is the initiative here of 94, as disarm is something you almost always want to do early in a round, whereas you can disarm late in a round, but you don't know who the right target is or whether or not the monsters will necessarily even be attacking in the next round, depending on the ability card drawn. So it's a bit more of a gamble that way. So while the initiative is great for the bottom half because it is, spoilers, a summon, the top half is something you'll often want to pair with a faster leading initiative. As mentioned, the bottom here is a summon. It's Summon Rift Spirit. It has 2 health, 2 move, 3 range, and no attack value here, so it muddles instead. And then at the end of turn, you grant one ally within range 3 a shield 1, and you control the grant abilities of this summon, so notably the shield here. This is a brand new design and very cool. Of course, this doesn't contribute offensively at all, of course, because it simply muddles and grants a shield. So this is very much a defensively minded summon. Pairs very well with the Iron Beast, as in muddling a target near the Iron Beast will cause them disadvantage, so they're less likely to kill the Iron Beast. You can also give the shield to the Iron Beast from the grant abilities, or perhaps another frontline ally, such as something like a Bruiser or perhaps a melee Craigheart. But the other thing that the muddle does, both for this, for the Iron Beast, but also for any other retaliate, including a level 5 summon you get later on, is the muddle prevents the monster from moving backwards if it's ranged to avoid disadvantage, so then they will take any melee retaliate you or your allies have, which is cool. With that being said, I do still think that the Rift Spirit is probably your weakest or second weakest level 1 summon, as it doesn't actually help advance your game plan of all of killing the monsters, it simply provides defensive benefits. So if you are struggling with keeping your summons alive, this is a great augment for them, as we've been finding that having one damage dealing summon, one defensively minded like frontline summon, and one supporting summon has worked really well for us. So 3 different cards with 3 different roles, and this is your only really one that's a defensively supporting summon at level 1. Your other options more offensively supporting summon. So this is good for that if you need it. Next up, we have Primal Assault. Top is a loss that grants 2 of your summons an attack +1, so 1 higher than the attack value on their stat sheet. Please do note that summons such as the Rift Spirit we just looked at, plus another upcoming summon, have no attack value, and therefore would do nothing if commanded to attack with this kind of action. As it modifies their base attack, it doesn't give them something like an attack 2 or an attack 3. You can also consume any of your 3 main elements here to add extra effects onto these 2 attacks. So Wound from Fire, Pierce 2 from the Wind, or a Curse from the Dark consumption. And this always gives 2 experience. With this only being 2 attack commands with no move action attached to them, there is a chance that one of the 2 attacks fails, as you just don't have 2 summons in the right positioning, or perhaps you only have 1 summon alive. So this can definitely be fairly nebulous in value, and I would definitely want to at least get 2 attacks out of this, plus ideally some sort of value from one of these elemental consumptions here, to actually have this feel like it's worth it, because this is a loss that could just be another summon instead, providing value for you over time. So the cost on playing a card like this is a little higher than in your average class. So overall, Primal Assault is probably the kind of loss that actually gets better at higher levels, as your access to summons who attack for higher values and your ability to make all 3 elements gets better over time, primarily through perks, but also through some of your cards. So while this isn't great at level 1, it does get better, so it's something you can kind of revisit as you continue to gain levels and experience with this class. Initiative at 20 here is a nice selling point for the card, although it isn't significantly faster than the next couple cards we're going to look at. So this is more minor in comparison to some classes who just really do struggle to go early. This class has, I would say, 5 or 6 reasonably fast initiatives at level 1, although a couple of these are pretty borderline for the fast spectrum, as the remainder of them are in your 20s or even very early 30s. At bottom here is a move to heal 3, nice and simple. These actions are quite nice when you have nowhere to move to on your turn, as your positioning matters a lot less than your summon's positioning does on average. So this will vary in potency depending on your playstyle. With the changes to your command cards no longer needing to be adjacent to your summons, there is a case for Soul Tethers to move very infrequently and to be quite far away from the carnage on average. This has been our experience thus far. If that is your kind of playstyle and you find yourself doing with this class, a bottom heal that's only range 3 may be blank some portion of the time, as you can't often move with this. So I would only pack this action if you're planning on staying a little bit closer to the battlefield. We found that our Soul Tether has been roughly range 4, occasionally range 5. So this has not been a particularly effective ability, unfortunately, for us. Next up is Shadow Dart. Top is an attack 2 range 4 curse that infuses the dark. This is definitely the simplest way to acquire this element at level 1 and comes with a reasonable attack tied to it. Curses work well with things like your Rift Spirit providing Muddle to fish out the curses, and Iron Beast to keep your summons alive. And as this is range 4 as a top action, it's quite simple to acquire a target, and your bottom action can always close the distance as a basic move too if need be. With that being said, the attack is only 2 damage, and attacking with this class directly isn't necessarily advancing your game plan a lot. The curse is probably more important here than the attack too, for just keeping your summons alive. So it'll only really be in the market for this if you can utilize the curse and or dark infusion here well. Initiative at 28 here is a bit worse than Primal Assault's 20, but similar enough where I value them about the same. I do think that Shadow Dart is a bit of a stronger card between its two halves, but you'll need to play some of your faster initiatives kind of regardless on this class. Bottom here is a persistent loss. It makes all of your summons attacks unaffected by retaliate, so both melee and ranged retaliate. This is something that we saw on Bone Shaper in Frosthaven and is an incredibly important part of any summoner's kit, as you'll never really understand how detrimental retaliate is for summoning classes until you go up against it and don't have access to a tool like this, which was a problem with first edition for many summoning classes, including Summoner herself. So this is a really nice kind of back pocket ability, and it is often more of like a sideboard card, to borrow a term from Magic the Gathering, where essentially you bring the card in for certain scenarios for the bottom ability when you see a bunch of monsters with Retaliate, but don't necessarily bring it in every scenario, especially if you're not going to use the top ability often. But this is really, really key, and I appreciate that it's in the level 1 kit, as there's a lot of monsters in 2nd edition that have a lot of built-in baked retaliate, such as Hounds, Flame Demons, Frost Demons, Enox Guards, all have implicit retaliate, as well as many monster abilities that will grant them retaliate for the round as well. So overall, I find Shadow Dart's probably something you'll bring in a decent amount of the time, and you can always start it if you like the top action and initiative here. Next up, we have Unending Dominance, so the Prodigal Sun returns, in a much more fair state, of course, than first edition, where it was essentially a linchpin card for this class, as my introduction talks kind of in depth about. Regardless, this name has quite a pedigree to follow for this card, as the entire class, as mentioned, was redesigned for it. So let's dive into the card itself. It now recovers 1 card from your lost pile. You will in turn invisible yourself, and then on the next summon action you perform, any summons summoned by that action gain invisible. So this will sit in your active area, wait for the next summon, and then give that summon or summons invisible in the case of the Shadow Wolves that we have already seen on this class. So this is still a very solid action here, and it's kind of nice because it essentially is something you can just sit in with your back pocket. And if something bad does happen to one of your summons, which is obviously going to happen in most scenarios at some point, it's kind of an inevitability with summoners, you can use this card, recover your best summon or favorite summon, you get invisible, and then when you summon that summon likely next round, it also is invisible, so it's protected for a round before it gets to go. Pardon me there. So this is something that we've really had a lot of good use for, and it actually gets better as you continue to gain levels on this class, as losing something like a level 5 or level 6 summon can be pretty devastating, and this is a way to get them back, because it doesn't have any restriction on which card you recover from your lost pile. So a lot of flexibility and power there. Even if it's just kind of spinning your wheels for a turn, because it doesn't actually do a lot itself. It has the flexibility and power. I love that it gives you in the summon invisibility as a kind of a way to provide some value for you in the short term. It also gives a small amount of stamina because you're recovering a card from your lost pile, even though you're losing one, so it's kind of like a stamina potion as well. Initiative at 22 here is nice and certainly welcome, as the bottom half of this card does like to go quickly on average, and the top arguably does as well, as invisible is strongest when you do it early in a round. Another good reason to bring this card. Bottom is a move 2, and then you can grant one of your summons a move 2. So this is another command of sorts, bundled with a move 2 for yourself. Note that this is a move 2 and not a move plus, so it doesn't look at your summon's base move value, except for one important exception that we'll get to later with an upcoming summon. So this will generally just be a move 2 of your summon, regardless of their normal move stat. This is a great action that allows you to kind of shuffle your summons around, while still moving yourself, and is great value for a bottom action and something you'll often want to do each rest cycle. I love the combination of a good initiative staple bottom action and a powerful top loss in this card. And for me, this is a top 3 non-summon card at level 1, and probably a top 5 card overall for this class. So definitely a good rework, and I do like that they still kept the card even in a changed form. Kind of a nod to the previous pedigree and legacy of this class. Next up, we have Wild Animation. So this is a heal 3, range 4 on the top, which is a good, solid, stable action. Also has a Diamond plus enhancement pip. So this can take a +1, any element of your choice, or a positive condition. Ward is my pick for best enhancement here, especially for cost versus benefit. As Ward 3 plus a heal, Ward plus a heal 3 is a great way to keep any summon alive and fighting another day. Overall, this is a fine action without the enhancement. I do appreciate the heal is range 4, as you're often a bit further away from the action compared to some other classes. As this is a top action, this is pretty easy to hit the mark with, provided you're within 4 or 5 ranges, 4 or 5 hexes of your target, because you can always move with it. It can also heal your allies as well for whatever that's worth, although we do find we're often healing up the summons, especially whatever the frontline summon is at the given time. Initiative 92 here is a good late initiative. It makes sense with the bottom of this card, as it is your other bottom summon here at level 1. It's a little awkward with the top if you want to heal in the middle of combat, but heals are done a reasonable amount of time as combat's winding down or between rooms. So this isn't a completely unusable number at the top, and you can always pair it with a faster one if you do need to try and save a summon from certain death. Bottom summon loss here is the Summon Thorn Shooter. Again, a reoccurring but reworked summon from first edition. This one's got 3 health, 2 move, 4 range, and instead of attacking, just like the spirit we looked at earlier, it poisons instead of attacking on a given turn. So this is very much fair. It lost an attack that was tied to the poison, but honestly, the Thorn Shooter along with the Wolves were such powerful summons in first edition that we never really cut them. And to compensate for that, it's gained a bit of health and movement, as it was only 1 move in first edition, which made it very awkward at times. But range 4 plus the new smart targeting on how they deal with negative conditions means that this Thorn Shooter should be poisoning something every turn. This is your offensively minded support style summon when I was referencing Rift Spirit earlier being the defensive one. This one, Poison, is very powerful for accruing value, and the more summons you have out, the more powerful it is. It's great with other mercenaries that might do multi-target attacks to kind of rack up that value. The best value for this bar for none at level 1 is with the Shadow Wolves, of course, because each of them get that value from the Poison, and Poison appears to stack really well together to take down targets quickly. So if you can protect the Wolves, the Thorn Shooter is not generally going to be in any danger, being at range 4 with move 2. So that's a very potent combination there. So overall, I do really like Thorn Shooter. I think the changes to it are fair, and I think it's still a reasonable summon, just no longer a summon you'll pack with you from something like level 1 to level 8 or 9. Because that is usually indicative of it's probably a little bit too powerful or too central to a strategy for a level 1 card, especially when you were a 9-card hand in first edition. Next up here, we have Biting Wind, so our first X card as well. Top is an attack 2, range 4, push 1, and then you can consume the wind to add +1 attack, +1 range, and +1 push. So with the wind, this becomes an attack 3, range 5, push 2. That gives 1 experience. Overall, there's a pretty big gulf here with and without the wind, and most importantly, whether or not you can utilize the push on this card. As otherwise, this is not only not very synergistic for the class, but also below rate for a card if it's just a attack 2, range 4. If you have the wind available a reasonable amount of the time and or can utilize the push to save your summons, put the monsters in a worse spot, perhaps aid your other mercenaries in some sort of positioning play that they need to do, then this can be a fine card. However, my biggest concern is that it competes with the wind for our next upcoming card, which has been our most consistent damage summon all the way up to and including level 5 on this class. Initiative at 82 here is nothing special, as you do have many cards in the 90s that are better at going slower, and this card doesn't particularly want to go slow either on either half of it, as both halves are positioning-based actions, and that's something that you often need to do quickly, which is another knock against the initiative here. Bottom is a loss. You grant one of your summons move +0, then they push all targets within range 1, sorry, all monsters within range 1, and then each target suffers 2 true damage after the push, and it infuses the wind. So this is a fine, but a definitely situational loss, as your summon may still be the closest target for those monsters after the push, as it's only a push 2. So this is best when coordinating with other allies to try and have them take the brunt of the damage after this action, or ideally picking off a few low health monsters with the true damage you gain from it. With how many losses you already play on this class, between your summons and other persistent abilities, space for actions like this are pretty limited. So this doesn't quite meet the mark for me in the average scenario, but definitely has applications against certain monster types such as vermlings and forest imps that are swarms of low health monsters. Next up, we have Drifting Stingers. Finally, the Jellyfish. So this is a summon floating jellyfish. Just a quick aside here, this card is an absolute home run flavor-wise, and my wife has been playing the class, has a huge interest in both marine biology and jellyfishes in particular, as they're one of her favorites. This has been such a standout for us in the campaign, and definitely very memorable. It helps that the card is great too, at least in my opinion. So 5 health, 3 attack, 1 move, and flying are kind of the implicit abilities. You might be kind of scratching your head here because 1 move and flying don't make much sense together. But the kicker here is that it gets +3 to all move abilities if the wind is strong or waning, and it infuses the wind when you summon it. So this is a very interesting stat line and definitely very pushed for a level 1 summon as long as you have that wind. As 4 move and flying combined with 5 health and 3 attack makes this such a consistent damage dealer and makes it so strong with commands and things like that, as you're able to essentially move it wherever you want in the battlefield to safety. This is probably one of the best examples of what I've been talking to throughout this video so far about moving your summons to the periphery of combat. The jellyfish and the shadow wolves from Living Night are some of the best examples of that because they are fairly squishy but high damaging summons. The jellyfish is something that's a bit of a puzzle. There's one for each of these where they need a specific element present to get some sort of benefit. The jellyfish's is purely selfish, where it simply buffs its own move. But the cool thing is based on the wording of it. It gives you +3 to moves as long as the wind is strong or waning. It works with commands, as previously mentioned. So they're usually going to be a move 4 because it'll be like a move +0. But even something like a move 2 that we saw an unending dominance command for a summon becomes a move 5 with the wind present because it gives +3 to it. So there's some really cool things you can do with the summon. And this is, like I said, it's been our most consistent damage all the way up to level 5 because we found the hounds were dying too quickly. So they're more like a burst of damage that usually lasts, 2, 3, 4 rounds. Whereas the jellyfish we've had survive the bulk of most scenarios. So this is a good candidate for unending dominance as card recovery, should it die. But the biggest question you're going to be asking is how do I keep the wind around as much as possible? So Ethereal Gust Bottom makes wind at level 1, and an upcoming card we're going to look at next, your final X card, also infuses the wind pretty easily. So those are both repeatable actions that'll give you 2 turns of wind respectively. Jellyfish itself gives you 2 as well, of course, because it infuses the wind when you cast it. The other way is typically through perks. So if you're interested in using the Jellyfish, having at least 1 or 2 perks in your deck that infuse the wind, you have 3 of them that you can add in up 2 different elements are a great inclusion here, because then the jellyfish may end up being self-sustaining, especially with sources of strength and things like that. So that's kind of it. I've already talked about this card a lot. It's great, but it has a cost to it. Do note, though, that move 1 flying is sometimes sufficient, especially once it's already in the middle of pitched combat. So you don't necessarily need wind all the time with this card, just a decent chunk of it, I would say. There are also items and other classes that I can't talk about in this video due to spoilers that make this very easy to achieve. So if you have something like that in your party, as we do, then it's not as big of a concern for you and it's very free to play. So that may taint your experience with it a little bit, but this is definitely a good, valuable thing to work towards if you can spare the time and energy to kind of make the wind present as much as possible. Initiative at 90 here is a good solid late summoning initiative, fairly replaceable in the fact that you do have a lot of these, but do keep in mind that you lose access to some or most of these throughout the combat once you start summoning your ethereal friends. So having one or two that you don't summon and use for their late initiatives is often a good strategy here as well. Bottom here is a simple but effective teleport 3, again with a +1 enhancement pip available. It is unfortunate that you lose this much of the time when you summon the Jellyfish, so you definitely want to balance your initiatives and move actions, keeping in mind the actions you lose once you start summoning. Next up is Unwavering Hand. This is our last level 1 and X card. Top is a command that grants one of your summons an attack +1 and gives 1 experience. Of course, this doesn't come with a move command as the other two previously did, so it does have a bit less utility that way. It's ideal for pitched combat, of course, because it's numerically stronger, but you're unable to gap close or reposition your summon with it. Overall, I'd recommend running 2 of your 3 attack commands at level 1 at minimum. Which 2 you pick exactly mostly comes down to personal preference, although I will say that Unwavering Hand here has the strongest initiative of the 3, which may end up being a solid tiebreaker for many. Initiative at 31 here is fairly mediocre, but as just mentioned, definitely better than the 51 or 61 offered on your other attack commands at level 1. It is also one of the 6 fast-ish initiative cards you have access to at level 1, although it is the worst of those 6 because it's the furthest away from 1 and the closest towards 50. Bottom here is a bit of a callback to Mind Thief. You control one enemy within range 4 to perform a move 1 action, and you can infuse the wind. This is actually kind of neat because you actually have an enhancement pip here to turn this into a move 2, which significantly increases the utility of this card. Of course, because it's 2 fairly mopey halves, a move 1 and the wind infusion, but together they are, in my opinion, reasonable. Sometimes the move one will be mostly blank. It can help you reposition the monster to try and save your summons, perhaps walk a monster into a trap they're right next door to. But overall, I'd look to play this for the bottom, mostly if you need the wind, either for your Jellyfish or something like Biting Wind's top action here. So overall, Unwavering Hand is a perfectly normal case for an X card where there are going to be some soul tethers that simply don't need it. I do like that it is one of your few ways to kind of get a big attack off at level 1, as an attack +1 command is 4 from your Jellyfish or 2 or 3 from most of your other summons. So for level 1 card choice, as I typically do, I'll recommend some potential cuts for a level 1 Soul Tether build. I'd definitely recommend playing at least 2 of your 3 faster initiatives, as well as 3 or 4 commands total, and at least 2 of those being attack commands. You'll also want to at least run 3 cards that have summons on them, ideally more, but 3 is probably the bare minimum that I'd be comfortable playing on this class, backed by something like Unending Dominance to buy one of them back if need be. As mentioned before, this class does not really function like a full character without summons in play or at least available, so do keep that in mind. As far as potential cuts go, I think Bonded Might here is probably the weakest of the 3 attack commands at level 1, so that would be my pick, as the bottom is quite poor and is competing within a couple other cards for wind consumption. If you'd prefer to have 2 attack commands that also move the summon and have less need for the wind, then Unwavering Hand here may be a fine cut as well, especially if you can't leverage the bottom at all, like if you aren't using the Jellyfish or something like that, then I think Hand is probably a little bit worse. But as mentioned, it does have a better initiative, so that definitely factors into it as well, and part of why I recommend cutting Might over Unwavering Hand in a vacuum. Next cut, I think Burning Tether is pretty reasonable here. None of the 3 dimensions for it are vital for this class. The Teleport 3 is the best reason to run this card, or if you're planning on dealing some damage yourself, maybe the party needs the wound or something like that from the top of Burning Tether. And again, I only like to top with the fire consumption, which you're typically going to get from Burning Passion at early levels, as it's really your only source unless you're running Forged Ferocity and not summoning the Iron Beast. For another potential cut, Planar Protection is probably on the chopping block. It is your most defensively minded of the summons, both between the Disarm top action and the Muddle and Grant Shields the bottom action. But again, it doesn't actually advance your game plan at all. Neither half of this card can deal any damage. So if you are struggling to keep something like your Iron Beast alive, or perhaps the Jellyfish at early levels, then the Rift Spirit can be really solid. But overall, I find it to be the least necessary of the level 1 summons for an overall game plan. If you like the defensive power of planar protection, then I would instead recommend cutting Wild Animation, as they're very similar rules, that kind of supporting style role, as they both don't attack. So for Thorn Shooter, you'd lose the poison and the heal 3 top action instead. Another potential cut for me is Primal Assault. As I've mentioned before, I find the top action actually scales better with levels as a loss, as you need multiple elements and multiple summons in play. And just as a loss in general, it's fairly low impact without those elements, which you are going to struggle with early on. And the heal has some logistical issues of only being range 3. So if you like the card, bumping that range 3 up to range 4 is definitely recommended and is a cheap enhancement. Uh, Another potential cut here is Shadow Dart. It is mostly predicated on the bottom action at early levels because that anti-retaliate is something you're going to need in some scenarios, but not necessarily in every scenario. Whereas the top action is perfectly serviceable. The attack and the curse is nice. The dark just isn't relevant much at low levels. But this card does get better, not only in certain situations for the anti-retaliate, but also at higher levels as you start needing the dark more. Finally, for level 1 cuts, my vote for the weakest level 1 card is definitely Biting Wind. Neither half of it contributes necessarily to the summoner game plan at all, whereas both of them are repositioning skills. The bottom being a fairly niche loss that has its applications, but again, to me, is more of a sideboard material where I like it against swarms of low health monsters, as mentioned. The top action, again, competing for the wind. Wind is your most needed element at low levels. Biting Wind top wants it. The Jellyfish certainly wants it as much as possible. Primal Assault wants it, and the bottom of Bonded Might wants it. So there's actually a decent amount of competition at level 1 for wind. So therefore, I'm not as huge a fan on Biting Wind's top action as a result. In addition, it has the most replaceable initiative of a lot of the late cards because it's in the 80s instead of the 90s that we're seeing a lot of these other cards, and it's not a card that wants to go late either. So those would be my recommended cuts for level 1. I don't see many or really any Soul Tethers cutting your 2 really fast cards, nor kind of the core summons for many, which for me is Iron Beast, Shadow Wolves, and Jellyfish. Your mileage may vary there, as much as they've been good in our campaign, not necessarily true in every campaign for you. So you could definitely try out other combinations as well. For some, the Shadow Wolves may be a cut, because they are very high risk and high reward. In that case, you're almost certainly running the Jellyfish, as otherwise your damage options are going to be very limited at low levels. All right, time to look at some leveled cards. First up at level 2, we have Intervening Apparitions. Top is an attack command, grants one of your summons an attack +0, but if you have the fire available to consume, you instead turn it into a hex area shape, similar to Intimidating Growl from the Bruiser. So it is 2 hexes next to the summon, plus 1 additional one at range 2 between the 2 monsters, so it forms a triangle hex shape next to you, and gives 1 experience. So this is a very powerful ability to have on a non-loss command, particularly with your wolves or your jellyfish to get multiple attack 2 or attack 3s out of it. However, there is a decent amount of setup involved, as you both need the monsters to be in the right shape, but also have the fire element available on the right turn. So this is definitely going to require some planning and coordination. And this is the kind of card that really makes Stamina or Elemental Potion really shine, as it helps make those conditions a lot more achievable for you. Either bringing back a card that makes fire, or perhaps a move command, or just Elemental Potion simply giving you the fire when the right situation crops up. So overall, this is a pretty easy way to cut Unwavering Hand from level 1, the attack command +1. You do trade the 1 damage, but so much potential power here in those situations where you do have the fire, and this is definitely the best payoff for fire that we've seen thus far. So this is definitely worth using, and we've had it do some pretty crazy turns already for us in the campaign. But some portion of the time it is just going to be attack +0, so do keep that in mind. Bottom of this card is on the next 3 sources of damage that would kill one of your summons, negate the damage, and that summon gains invisible and stun, and this triggers 3 times. So this is a persistent loss that also infuses the dark. Um, this has been pretty good for us as well, particularly in boss scenarios. Flavor-wise, it kind of phases out your summons, the next 3 killing blows against them, as the invisible plus the stun means they're out of commission for a bit. Note you cannot command a summon to do anything, move, or attack while it is stunned, so that is going to come up some portion of the time. This is overall a pretty nice trump card in tougher scenarios, as the summon will go before you on a given turn, and then the stun and invisibility will wear off. So it sounds like it's going to happen for a long time, but really it generally doesn't. And this is really good to kind of keep your designated frontline summons alive. So this is usually Iron Beast from level 1 to 4, and then oftentimes a different summon at level 5. And if that summon dies, the rest kind of fall in short order. So this is kind of a backup plan you can have in place to keep your summons around. As if this card saves your summons from dying 3 times, it does effectively save you 2 cards, unless it's the wolves dying. We've used this a handful of times, and it's been particularly good boss scenarios for us, as mentioned, as a lot of the time the bosses aren't dying, so of course they're sitting there slugging back, so your summons are more likely to die when their targets aren't dying before them. Initiative at 34 here is on the fine side of mediocre for Soul Tether. It's a usable number if you don't have anything available to pair with it, but particularly for the top, you want to go quicker than that on average, as you are relying on both the element and the monster positioning staying the same. So this is definitely not an exciting number, but is usable in most situations. The bottom also doesn't necessarily want to go slower quickly because it's usually something you're doing on a setup turn and not in the middle of combat anyways. And this is a pretty easy thing to do on turn 1 with a late summoning initiative top to summon your first friend. So other option here at level 2 is Void Imbuement. Top is a persistent non-loss, so definitely important there. On the next 3 attacks performed by your summons, add +1 attack and +1 pierce to the attack, and the third use slot gives 1 experience. This is a great little value engine that'll be easy to trigger before your next rest cycle, as commands will chew through the uses of these pretty quickly, or if you just have multiple summons in place, the wolves can get through these in a single round of combat plus a command, for example. Against shielded targets, this is effectively +2 attack for a total of 6 effort, which is really nice when this is so easy to set up early on each rest cycle. It's one of the few non-loss ways that isn't a command that gives experience on this class as well, especially without needing an element. So that is very notable here. Overall, it's a great bread and butter staple action that definitely shines against shields, although monsters with at least 1 shield are pretty common, especially at higher difficulty levels. Initiative at 23 here is nice and better than Apparitions 34 in contrast, although not better by a huge margin and in similar spectrum of what I like to call fast-ish. It's funny because I actually think Apparitions wants the faster number here, particularly for its top action, whereas the top of Void Imbuement doesn't necessarily want to go early. The bottom does appreciate speed, so it's not wasted by any means. Bottom here is a move command for one of your summons, giving them +1 move and jump. This would normally be quite fantastic, however you do have a flying summon already, plus another one is offered at both level 4 and level 9, so there is a reasonable number of your summons that don't care about the jump portion of this. But the kicker is that with the wind consumption, you can grant this move command to 2 of your summons instead, giving 1 experience. This is already a decent action, and giving 2 +1 jump move commands is very, very good. Commands are also quite rare on the bottom of a card and really free you up to do good things with your top action. Something like an attack command that doesn't move is so much easier to do when you have a bottom move command. So this is really cool because you can attack with the summon, then move it away, or vice versa to get it in position. Provides extra support. It's just really, really good to have, and is such a staple action, and is doubly so with the wind available. Of course, one of your key summons that needs to move around the battlefield is the Jellyfish, so there is some tension there. But overall, at least the Jellyfish is getting a move 2 jump out of this, so it's still fine. And it works so well with the rest of your summons on average, because the Jellyfish flies anyways. So overall, Void Imbuement has 2 really solid halves and a really good initiative. As far as level 2 card choice, I think both cards are good and competitive here, and I don't think there's a wrong answer. This will mostly come down to preference of whether or not you want the attack command or the get out of jail free with apparitions there, with that loss that keeps the summons alive for the next 3 turns, or the 2 solid halves of void imbuement here, an enhancement for your damage on the top from your summons, and a really good positioning tool in the bottom half with this move or double move command. Our party was actually pretty split on this card choice. However, my wife wanted to focus on the Jellyfish, so she was very excited to try the area attack command from Apparitions, and the bottom loss has saved her summons quite a few times already. I do think without elemental consumption consistently, I do lean towards Void Imbuement, as both halves are reasonable without the wind for the bottom, and it has a better initiative as well. At level 3, our first option is Deadly Mischief. Summons a Covetous Imp, has 5 health, 3 move, 3 attack, and whenever this summon kills an enemy, you gain the money token directly instead of placing on the hex the enemy occupied. So this is interesting because I actually view this as mostly a side grade to the Jellyfish we've had on offer since level 1. As comparing the two, they have the same health, same attack value, and it's the move that changes. So the Jellyfish is 1 or 4, depending on whether or not the flying is present, but also has flying in addition to that, whereas this imp does not. So really, I think the best case for the imp is if you want 2 copies of that same sort of stat line, so kind of a frontline, fairly squishy damage dealer, as I think the ability of the imp is mostly just trinket text. Summoners are usually pretty easy to loot on. It doesn't really matter where you are. Um, and it's not necessarily that gold isn't useful in this class, because it is. Gold is always useful on summoning classes, but just the fact that, it's not actually providing any tangible benefit if you're just moving to grab the coins. So it's a little bit of extra money. But overall, for a level 3 card, the stat line of this is definitely a little bit under par. So that's kind of where I sit with Deadly Mischief. I do acknowledge that 3 move is a little better than move 1 or move 4 flying, depending on the situation. It's a little bit easier to more consistently gap close. But as mentioned, we found the Jellyfish is only needed the wind up a portion of the time and not consistently, as once you've gap closed and are kind of commanding it to the periphery of the combat, it's usually within range 1 or range 2 of another monster anyways. Initiative 81 here is a bit below par for something of like a summoning initiative for this class, although the bottom doesn't want to go slow either, so it's definitely not ideal in that sense, but 81 is generally fine to summon at. You can always pair it with a different card to go in the 90s if you are really worried about it, as there are some monster attacks that occur in the 80s as well. Bottom is an attack 2, range 3 that infuses the fire. This is definitely a nice way to contribute to combat yourself as a bottom action. Flip an modifier, make an element as kind of a free action, because your bottom actions sometimes are just teleports that don't do anything in a given situation, as again, you don't have to move a lot in this class. As this is range 3, this has the same issues that we saw with the heal 2 range 3 from level 1, Primal Assault. So this may not be easy to pull off as initially looks, as you already have to be in the right place and closer to the combat than you perhaps would be for your other abilities that often operate at a range 4. As we found that our Soul Tether is usually around that range, and your actions tend to be a range 4 or have no range restriction on them otherwise. This does get a little better if you plan on taking the summon next level that wants the fire present for a buff for your party. So I'd look ahead to see what you think of that card here as well, as if you're struggling to make the fire, then this may be a good way to do that. Other option here at level 3 is Shaping the Void. Top is an attack 2, range 4. You may then ward any target within range 4, and then you infuse the wind here. Both of these enhancement pips are the top tier ones, so the attack here can take any negative condition, an element, or a +1, whereas the diamond plus on the heal here can take any positive condition, which is really cool. So something like Ward and Strengthen, Ward and Bless are fairly expensive but very powerful options on the Ward here. This action is played really well for us in our party, as it's a simple attack, wards an ally, usually a summon, and then also makes a key element for you with the wind, whether using that for the Jellyfish or one of your other cards. This has been a really simple, stable action, and the ward is played really, really well, especially in tandem with shields on the Iron Beast, Muddle from the Rift Spirit or other sources, and curses from your own deck. Provides a lot of longevity for your summons and keeps them alive longer than they probably should be. otherwise. So overall, this action's played great for us and has definitely been a good standout, and it's one of the easiest ways to make wind for any jellyfish-focused summoners. Initiative at 41 here is not ideal, as this is typically a top action you want to do quickly to kind of get your shields up via ward, potentially pick off a low health monster before they act. I would typically pair this top with a faster leading card. The bottom doesn't care as much, which is nice. Bottom, as mentioned, is a teleport 3. You then perform a heal 1, targeting all summons within range 1. Sorry, all of your summons within range 1. This is a much needed movement card, as we have not yet been offered a card with movement since level 1, and you won't be offered another one until level 5 either. The heal is incidental and comes up occasionally. Our Soul Tethers primarily use it to cleanse negative ailments on summons such as wound and poison. Wound in particular is very nasty with how low the health totals are on many of your summons. So for level 3 card choice, for me personally, this is a relatively easy choice, at least compared to level 2, where I think both level 2 cards are very competitive, and I actively want many of both of them in many of my build ideas for this class. I find both sides of Deadly Mischief a little underbaked comparatively, as the Covetous Imp is not necessarily even an upgrade over the Jellyfish, which we've had since level 1, and they fulfill the same role. So far, we've liked really having 3 summons out. I mentioned this in a previous portion of the video. One is a frontline to soak damage, one as a damage-oriented value machine to use your commands on, and then a third as a utility buff or debuffer sort of role. Since this only fulfills the same role as the Jellyfish, I'm unsure how many people are going to want 2 of that effect active at once, which means we're left with a mediocre initiative that doesn't work particularly well at the bottom of the card, and a action that is going to struggle with this range 3, at least from our experience. If you are in the market for Fire Infusion and find yourself at range 3, I think a bottom attack is pretty nice. However, this also isn't super glamorous for a level 3 card. So I think it'll perform fine, but if you're not using it for the top, then this isn't a super exciting action. As an initiative of 80 is very much just fine for this class, we do not struggle to go late at all. It's almost all 90s that you're offered otherwise. Whereas with Shaping the Void, I think it has 2 very cohesive halves, held back by, again, a poor initiative. But Shaping the Void is a top attack that wards and makes a key element, and Ward is such a good defensive layer in 2nd edition and pairs so well with these other mechanics I've mentioned, such as Muddle and Shields. And the bottom is the only movement card that we're offered between level 1 and 5. So if you're not taking this card, between just 1 and 4, you're really going to struggle for movement. Especially with this class's already lack of mobility. So for me, Shaping the Void is a pretty clear pick. If you're not struggling with movement, if you want to try out the Imp, I think that card is fine. I just think it's definitely a bit of a half step below Shaping the Void overall. I could even see going back for one of the whichever level 2 you didn't take being a fine option here as well, because I really do like both 2s, and I think they both play well in many Soul Tether builds. Level 4, our first option here is Strength in Numbers. So the top is a heal 2, target 2, range 4. Add +1 to the heal on each target that is adjacent to 2 or more allies. This is a pretty big hoop to jump through for the +1 heal. Although 2 heal 3s are definitely better than 2 heal 2s, it's not significant enough to make me like desperately seek this out each time I use this card. As it stands, 2 heal 2s at range 4 is fine, but nothing particularly exciting by a level 4, as you'll definitely want to be in a larger party to really make this work for the +1 heal enhancement. It's not as easy as it sounds to have 2 different targets adjacent to 2 or more allies. You're either going to get both or none a lot of the time, because they'll kind of help fulfill each other. It plays best in a kind of a menagerie style summoner build that plays 3 or 4 summons at a time, ideally with something like the Shadow Wolves that are 2 summons for 1 card, as that'll make the conditional bonus healing on this easier to achieve. Initiative at 45 here is once again pretty poor, especially for a heal that usually wants to go faster but is also positioning based. It occasionally wants to go slower to like close out a room. This number helps neither of those situations and is not ideal with the bottom action either, which is a bottom attack. Bottom here is an attack X and range X +1, where X is the number of your summons. So this is likely going to sit between x equals 2 and 4, depending on the situation. Anything more than that essentially requires a Shadow Wolves from level 1 and or a heavy focus on playing as many summons as possible at a given time. I'm happy with this at anything where x equals 3 or higher, as if it's lower than that, this is strictly worse than Deadly Mischief's bottom action we just saw at the previous level of an attack 2, range 3, but also doesn't infuse the fire. My main concern here is getting this number to range 4. So x equals 3 is attack 3, range 4, which seems to be the sweet spot for a lot of your potential actions. Also gives you enough distance between you and the monsters because you are very squishy even at this point in your career. You're going to have 9 health at level 4, for example. Other option here at level 4 is Volatile Flame. Starts off as a very uninspiring but simple curse range 4. However, with the dark consumption, it also stuns the target and gives 1 experience. This actually has shades of our level 1 card that disarm the target at range 4. And of course, this is miles better with the dark, as a stun curse is so much better than a disarm. We also really haven't had a lot of good ways to consume the dark yet. This is probably our first major payoff. And we've had a couple cards that do infuse it pretty easily. So both Halves of Living Night, our Shadow Wolves does it, as well as Shadow Dart, our other curse card from level 1, does it, and it's very synergistic. As you do an attack 2 curse, and then next turn consume this the dark on this card for another curse plus a stun. Overall, this is a little bit scary as it has such a low floor, but a high ceiling for a card. So there's definitely some worry there. But I do think that overall it's nice in your back pocket, especially when combined with a good initiative and a bottom staple summon, as we'll see here. Initiative at 97 here is a perfect summoning initiative, which works well at the bottom. It doesn't necessarily work well at the top, because while stuns are fine no matter where you go in a round, they are at their best, as with all negative conditions, typically when done early on, as you know what monster to lock down this turn that's particularly problematic, whereas next turn it's more of a dice roll, depending on what's occurred and what the monsters have pulled and things like that since then. Bottom summon here is a summon Ember Sprite, so it has flying implicitly. It has 3 move, 3 attack, 3 range, sorry, not 3 attack, 3 move, 3 health, 3 range, and 1 attack, pardon me. And then implicitly has an ability, all allies within range 3 gain Retaliate 1, that is range 3, while the fire is strong or waning, and as you guessed it, it infuses the fire itself. This has been really, really cool card for us. Incredible value thus far, and it's another great payoff for creating and maintaining an element. Together with your frontline summon, usually having Retaliate, so the Iron Beast, or an upcoming level 5 card, these do stack together. And I do really appreciate that this is a massive aura around the Ember Sprite. Everything within range 3 is often going to target most, if not all, of your party, as this also sits at exactly range 3 to do its own attack each turn. And the Retaliate being range 3 is massive, because it means that even annoying ranged monsters, such as Living Spirits and Flame Demons, will still often take that Retaliate themselves. So the biggest question here is how to keep both the Ember Sprite out of combat. That is a little bit easier because it is range 3, only 3 health though, but also how to keep the fire up. As of course, if you're combining this with the Jellyfish, for example, plus a frontline, you're now juggling the fire and the wind on any given turn. And the fire on this card is something you want present as much as possible, whereas the wind on the Jellyfish is only something you need some portion of the time. And our fire generation at this point has been fairly lackluster. There's the double strengthen card at level 1 and the bottom of Iron Beast itself. So really, you're only going to have that one option. And it's primarily going to be from perks and items would be my recommendation after the first 2 turns of this wear off from the Ember Sprite itself. So this isn't necessarily going to be the strongest pick for everyone. Our particular party has been very conducive as we have allies that help maintain the elements for a very long portion of time. And of course, we've had very much a focus on wind so far from the Jellyfish, and now she's shifted into a bit of a fire focus as well for the Ember Sprite. So she's taken perks and things like that to accommodate it. Overall, though, Ember Sprite works so well with the frontline kind of damage soak strategy that some of your other summons have. The Iron Beast, and then a summon we'll look at next level, level 5. This has been a really great card for us. and the top has come up occasionally, just stun, curse when you have the dark available. But there is definitely some concern here where both halves really do need elements. So as far as level 4 card choice, if you think you can stomach the pretty heavy elemental cost of this card, Volatile Flame has been fantastic for us. If you can't, I think Strength in Numbers is a totally fine option. Two reasonable halves, definitely held back by a poor initiative that doesn't work well with them, but at least this card is elemental agnostic. If you're already having issues with elements, keeping it up for your Jellyfish or for your other actions and things like that. So I do think both cards have their place. I just think Volatile Flame has a higher upside, so a higher ceiling, but definitely has a lower floor if you can't meet its elemental requirements. At level 5, our first option here is Living Mountain summons a Rock Colossus. This very beefy summon has 12 health, 2 move, 1 attack, and implicitly muddles on all of its attacks, and also has 2 melee retaliate. But wait, there's more. Add +1 to all heals targeting this summon. At the end of each of this summon's turns, it performs a heal 1 self, which does become a heal 2 self from its implicit ability. This is such a large upgrade over the Iron Beast that many of you have been running since level 1 for that frontline damage soak roll. It has just so many different facets to it going on, and we've actually had it for a couple scenarios now, and no one has killed it, although boy, the monsters have come close a couple times, and has absorbed just a truly absurd amount of damage for us. The combination of Muddle and Melee Retaliate is so nice, as once this guy bonks a monster, the ranged monsters will not back up to avoid disadvantage due to the Muddle, stay put and take all that juicy Retaliate damage. It also stacks so well with the ranged Retaliate from Ember Sprite from the previous level to allow it to reflect 3 damage back to melee attackers, 2 from itself, 1 from the Retaliate, 1 range 3 the Ember Sprite provides as long as the fire is present. It's also easy to keep it alive. 12 health, the self-healing, and the buff to heals that you use targeting it means that you can basically, you have a basic heal 3, for example, from level 1. That's a heal 4. It then heals 1 at the end of its turn. That's 2. That's 6 health from one simple, not even complicated way to do this. And it's back up to half its maximum health. And this just scales so well with multiple other actions. The multi-target heal from the previous level we just looked at is also really solid with it. So really, for most players, either of the level 4s is going to work well for you for this card. It's just such a fantastic frontline option that can just sit there and dish out the beats and really deal more damage on the enemy's turn through the retaliate. And the muddle is so perfect for that here as well. The other cool thing is you have perks that allow a summon to do a teleport to from your attack modifier deck. So you can actually get this in the perfect position to do as much maximum retaliate as possible, even when it's not on its turn, through flipping this on your other summons. I would definitely recommend some sources of ward and healing for this card if you're planning on using it to keep it alive, because it doesn't have any shields, unlike the Iron Beast. Initiative at 19 here is actually quite surprising for a summon. What actually works pretty well here is this is a summon that can actually take a few hits on the turn it comes down and live. Plus the bottom actually appreciates going quickly too, so this is a nice number for it. You won't struggle to go slow with this class, so any turn you're summoning, you can easily pair this with like a 90 plus card if you are concerned with it dying somehow. Bottom is a teleport 3 that also grants a summon a teleport 3 afterwards, both having just the basic +1 enhancement pips. This is honestly incredible. It's been a great way to slingshot something like an Ember Sprite, the Jellyfish, perhaps even a Shadow Wolf to the right spot if you don't have the wind to catch up to the monsters. This is your best movement skill yet, and as a double teleport 3 is a ton of value. Do note you can add an element to the first teleport 3 for yourself, but that's going to be very expensive. Elements are expensive on a level 5 card doubly, so it's going to run you at least 200, if not more gold. Other option here is Primal Infusion. Top is a very simple but powerful grant one of your summons a move +1 and an attack +1 that gives an experience. This is very powerful. Even something simple like the Jellyfish with the Wind Present is a move 5, attack 4. This also scales really well with an upcoming summon at level 7. So I'd probably look ahead to see if that's something you might be interested in. We haven't actually gotten a command since level 2, as both level 2s were a command on one half of the card. So this is definitely a nice pickup, even if it's a little simple and not as glamorous next to the Rock Colossus. Initiative at 88 here is nothing to write home about, but is a reasonably slow late initiative. It's our first command with a good initiative. However, commands tend to play a little better quickly, as one could use for them to move your summon to the periphery of combat, as I mentioned a couple times here, and take out a monster there to keep them safe, which doesn't really work very well when you're going slowly. Bottom is a very cool persistent loss, definitely build enabling. Your summons gain +1 attack while the fire is present, +1 and jump while the wind is present, and +1 shield while the dark is present. This is undeniably powerful, and of course, as I mentioned, build enabling. However, I will say this class will struggle by itself to keep elements up consistently without making a lot of attacks to flip modifiers from your perk deck. It definitely requires some luck, and also taking specific cards at level ups to enable this. I'd probably look to take both level 3s, for example, that infuse elements, and probably skip both 4s in that case. With high prosperity bringing better item selection, this does seem pretty doable and is definitely bananas with party members that easily produce elements but don't necessarily use them as often. So this will vary a lot in power. I love the design. Can't wait to try this one out myself. For level 5 card choice, we took Living Mountain, as alluded to already, and have been enjoying it thus far. Both halves are incredible and are linked to a nice fast initiative for when you want to use the bottom half. It's kind of crazy that there is a non-zero amount of Soul Tether players that may not have had any move actions between level 2 and 5, as only 2 on offer before Living Mountain and Shaping the Void from level 3. This is a class that doesn't need to move all that often, but I'd probably still look to take at least one of those 2 cards, as otherwise you're probably going to need to take an upcoming level 6 card that has teleport, as you won't have any others between 1 and 5 if you haven't taken those 2. Um, Overall, I can't not recommend Living Mountain because we've been having an absolute blast with this card. I think Primal Infusion very much lends itself to the bottom half being a very situational but powerful build enabling bottom action that some Soul Tethers are going to struggle to use, whereas the top is a really clean, awesome command. So I think the crux of this is you're going to have to look at your level 6, 7, and 9s upcoming because they all have good candidates to use with this command, but particularly level 7. And obviously the 9s, but 9s are less a concern for many players because you often won't hit 9 on any given class. If you like the look of the 7 in particular, the summon there, the Void Eater, then I would definitely consider taking Primal Infusion because the top command is so nice with him and really leads to some pretty absurd turns. Otherwise, I think Living Mountain is a slam dunk, good initiative, great bottom action, and such a powerful tanky summon. I don't know that I can really say with confidence there's ever been a really strong frontline tanky summon before, but this one definitely hits the notes for that, and we're having a blast with it. So can't recommend it enough. I'm going to try Primal Infusion myself when I play this class because I want to really try and break this bottom action here. But overall, I think these are really great cards. I like how different they are, but they both work so well for this class. So definitely great level 5s here. Definitely props to whoever designed this class. At level 6, our first option here is Oozing Manifestation, so summon Slime Spirit. We can finally summon our own slime. It's pretty cool. 5 health, 2 move, 2 attack, and implicitly poisons on hit. When the summon would die, if there are no character tokens on this card, instead negate the damage and place a character token on this card to summon a Slime Spirit in an empty hex adjacent to this summon. So you'll definitely need the summon to die to really feel like you're getting your money's worth or value out of it, as 2 summons attacking each turn, applying poison, and therefore getting more damage from the poison they themselves are applying is such a strong effect. We've really only ever seen in Crimson Scales before. Multiple summons applying poison is a very, very powerful effect and is not to be underestimated. With that being said, there's a bit of a mini game here where you have to let it die exactly once on purpose, ideally early on in the snare as possible, and then protect both of them from dying as long as possible, because they only have 5 health and no defensive measures whatsoever. But overall, very cool card. I like that it's an option because poison is so nice for summoning builds, and your only other consistent source of poison has been the little thorn shooter from level 1 who doesn't actually attack himself. Initiative at 86 here is on the fine side of unexciting for this class. No real difficulties going late in the round to summon, as mentioned before. You'll definitely need to keep an eye out for faster initiatives. I typically like having around 2 or 3 at minimum that can go faster than 30s on summoners, but the faster really the better. Bottom is a teleport 4. It poisons a monster within range 2 after the teleport. This is our first unconditional teleport or move 4, and comes with a nice little poison to augment your ally's damage, as well as your summon's damage as well. This is a nice value action if you think this scenario might not be conducive to the top summon, or if you simply need a big teleport, something like an escape scenario. Other option here at level 6 is Tear the Fabric. This is a attack 2, range 4 curse. You then target one of your summons with an invisible within range 4, and then you infuse the dark on top of that. This definitely reminds me a lot of Shaping the Void from level 3 that did an attack and then a ward within the same range instead of the invisibility, and then made a wind instead of a dark. Definitely another value-based action. Do some damage, shove a curse in their deck, and then invisible one of your squishy damage dealing summons. So that could be the Jellyfish or the Imp at this point, or at the next level, I think a perfect synergistic ability with this card, as your next summon needs the Dark at level 7, which this perfectly sets up, and then also the invisibility protects it because it's a fairly squishy high damage summon. So overall, Tear the Fabric's top is perfect when paired with a level 7 summon, but is very generally useful as well. So I would definitely look ahead to see if you like that summon. If you do, highly recommend Tear the Fabric. It's a really good solid value action. The fact that this curses and that next summon also has to do with curses really is just the cherry on the cake there. And if you took the Rock Colossus at 5, those muddles you're throwing every round are going to pull those curses out sooner rather than later as well. Another big selling point to this card is that initiative right in the middle here. Wow, this is an 11. We have not been offered something this fast, period. It is your fastest card, and it is a little faster than those premium level 1 cards you're running that are probably still in that 12 to 14 range. I also like that both halves like to go quickly here. The top, Curse and Invisibility, are really nice to do early in a round, whereas the bottom is a defensive reactive card that absolutely needs to go fast. So ultimately, this is a really, really nice package and is a great reason to take the card. I've taken higher level cards that just have a good initiative and mediocre abilities, and I'm actually happy with both sides of this card on top of that. So it definitely speaks well to it. Bottom is a round bonus. Grant all of your summons Shield 1 and Melee Retaliate 1, both with some very expensive enhancement pips. If you're feeling very moneybags here, perhaps you've taken the Covetous Imp and done well with it. This is really cool. Giving all of your summons 1 extra shield, 1 extra retaliate. Again, stacks really well with Living Mountain. Giving him a shield is huge. Combines really well with Ward as well. And then stacking retaliate. The fact that it's all of your summons on a fast initiative card here. It's not a glamorous ability, but it is a good ability, especially for summoners. Your summons are pretty quick to fall apart with any sort of focus fire. Even the Rock Colossus can die. So giving a combination of shields and retaliate here is really nice. And maybe it even saves one of your backline squishier summons like the Ember Sprite, perhaps the one of the other supporting minded ones, or perhaps even the Jellyfish or the Imp survives a hit because of this, right? And then does some retaliate and keeps on kicking for the next turn where you patched up with a heal. So for level 6, I think Oozing Manifestation, the top half of it is the bulk of the power. However, the bottom half is also very solid with a move 4 poison, teleport 4, which you really haven't had on offer much. Whereas Tear the Fabric has 2 really good solid halves, but are much better due to the faster initiative and some synergies with the level 7 card. I know our particular summoner took this card. We just finished last scenario with her hitting level 6 here, as I think she plans on taking a level 7 summon. But even just for the fast initiative and 2 good defensively minded halves, this card is great. I want to try the Oozing Manifestations out. I think they work really well with the level 5 card that we just looked at here, the Primal Infusion here, Persistent Loss. Giving them both +1 attack or +1 move or +1 shield is very powerful. Anything you can kind of double dip on here, the fact that they poison, stacks so well with each other and really ramps up that damage here. There's just a bit of a bit of a hoop to jump through with this card, where you really need one of them to die early on, so you make that copy and then kind of off to the races from there. Not that that's a huge ask. It does only have 5 health. So overall, I really like both sixes. I do wish that there was more level ups where you could really conceivably go back for a card, but they've really all been really high quality outside of a couple early on that I don't really see that happening very often, which does speak to the design of this class well, where every level up is exciting. So at least there's that. At level 7, our first option here is Divided Mind. Top is a heal 5, range 4. And then if you consume the wind, you can grant the target of the heal ability a push 1, range 1, immobilize. Card always gives 1 experience as it's a command of sorts. This is a nice 1-2 punch to keep your summoner or ally alive, push and immobilize the monster so they don't back up and take another attack on your ally, which of course negates the healing you just did. Without the wind, this is on the mediocre side of fine, as 5 healing is a lot, but by level 7, monsters can easily dish that out within a single attack, if not more. This has been the first real way to consume wind for a benefit in quite a while, so this may be fairly easy to pull off at this point, depending on card and perk choices. It's definitely pretty strong with the wind, but not ideal without, I will say, for a level 7 card. Initiative at 30 here is fine and usable due to your relative lack of fast initiatives, far from exciting as the top half really wants to go quickly. The bottom half doesn't care as much and is fine going fast-ish, so this mostly works out. Bottom is a grant 1 of your summons and attack +0, but if you have the fire, you grant 2 of your summons the attack ability instead and grant 1 experience. This is incredible for a bottom action with the fire. Bottom attack commands are very rare, and this can be a double one with the right setup. Even without the fire, I'm pretty happy with this action, as a bottom command just pairs so nicely. It means you can miss effectively triple attack with a summon on 1 turn with the top command, and being able to effectively quadruple attack with 2 summons with the fire present is just tons of value. So really, this is a very solid card. Obviously, the fire does make it a lot better, but you do need 2 summons that are in the right positions to make the attacks. So something like implicit range or just 2 melee summons is going to be required for some portion of the time. So overall, I find most of the power in Divided Mind is baked into the top with the wind or the bottom action with or without the fire. The initiative is definitely on the awkward side of fine for both halves. I think both want to go quickly, but the bottom is a little more okay going slow, because at least it's not trying to save a summon from a bad situation. The monsters pull something like a 20 or 23 and kill your ally before you get to do anything. Other option here is negative energy. This is the summon Void Eater. I've made a couple references to the summon throughout the video so far, and I do think it is one of your best summons before 9. Not that that's super surprising as a level 7 card. So it has 6 health, 3 move, and 4 attack. Whenever this summon kills an enemy while the dark is strong or waning, you shuffle a curse card into the monster's attack modifier deck. Of course, like the other 2 that care about elements, this also infuses its own element, the dark, here to start. This is probably one of the best summons to command, just bar none. It starts as an attack 4, so any plus attacks are 5s. Whenever it kills something with the Dark Present, it does a reverse curse. It curses them when it kills them instead of not killing them, which is often better. This is insane with the area attack command from level 2 if you took that and have the fire available. There's so many ways to kind of break this summon. The level 5 attack plus move plus command is a move 4 attack 5. That's almost always going to shuffle a curse into the deck when you target the right monster. This is very squishy for a level 7 summon, only having 6 health, but boy is the payoff good. And I haven't even started talking about synergy with the level 6 card yet, Tear the Fabric. As mentioned, that attacks and curses. The more curses, the better. That makes the dark perfect for this card, and then it also turns the summon invisible, so it's got 1 free turn of risk-free attacking, especially if you initiative weave and have it go slowly in the following round. So this is a sweet, sweet summon, very synergistic with how they've built the Soul Tether this time around. Very fun card. Can't wait to try it out. We're at level 6 here, so we should be approaching level 7 pretty quick. as we're getting a lot of experience each scenario now. So overall, this is a very cool ability. Initiative at 95 here is perfect. Make sure this little critter goes slow and safe the first round before he gets to actually act, because of course having this thing die before it goes is an absolute disaster. No big complaints here with the initiative. You also can rebuy this guy if he dies with your level 1 unending dominance, so that's always really nice. Um, the bottom is pretty initiative agnostic, although it probably wants to go quicker in a vacuum, but overall the 95 is fine. Teleport 4 here on the bottom of this card, and then it strengthens one ally within range 3. So there's effectively a 7 range on the strengthen between the teleport and the range itself. This is a very versatile and great ability. Any sort of strengthen tied to a bottom action, but particularly a move action, has historically been very good in the Gloomhaven universe, and I suspect this will play very similarly. The fact that it's a teleport 4 is really, really nice. You can even teleport through a wall into a room with another ally and give that buff to an ally. Particularly good with a strong summon that you might be using, or more likely a mercenary that's doing some sort of area or multi-attack this turn. But overall, fantastic staple action on the bottom, very powerful, and I suspect game-changing summon on the top that does have that mini game of needing an element. Overall, great card. So for level 7 card choice, our party is leaning towards negative energy here as she's kind of built herself with the Tear the Fabric choice at level 6. I think this is a great replacement finally for the Jellyfish that we've been running since level 1, especially if we didn't take the Covetous in at 3. It's probably about time you need another damaging summon. And this one just shoves in the curses in addition to what it's doing, which is fantastic. I think Divided Mind for those who maybe have taken other choices at the previous level ups is very good. Particularly the bottom half is very, very powerful. Of course, the kicker is you don't get to take the summon that it pairs best with, probably the Void Eater, at least until level 8 or 9. And skipping both 8s is definitely going to be rough, but is possible, whereas you're never going to skip a 9. So I think if you think you're going for the long term and getting this class to 9, I think Divided Mind bottom is very powerful, combined with a decently used top, especially with the wind. Both halves needing elements here is a little rough, although I think the bottom is usable without, whereas negative energy needs the other element, but it just needs to be present, not consumed, so you can really just kind of cycle with your couple dark cards and keep this up the vast majority of the time. By level 7, you're easily going to have perks that make your various elements, so maybe this isn't as much of a cost either way. But I really do like that Negative Energy has 2 fantastic halves and a very good summoning initiative. With that being said, I definitely want to try out Divided Mind at some point. It's just awkward that the command is best with the Void Eater. Um, so that's got some awkwardness there, very much intentional, as otherwise I think it would be too powerful of a combination. This way you have to at least skip a level 8 to get both. At level 8, our first option is Interplanar Mastery. Top is an attack 3, range 4, always gives 1 experience. If you consume the fire, you get +1 to the attack and a wound. Consuming the wind gives you +1 attack and pierce 2, and the dark gives you +1 attack and curse. So this is very much shades of the level 1 loss that we were offered with the double attack +1 command. This, instead of giving your attack command some sort of buff at a loss, this is an attack from you. So it's a little bit different and definitely a little odd for a class so focused on summoning, but definitely interesting to see a different facet of it where perhaps you focus on the elements yourself. So needless to say, if you are running a lot of the summons that care about elements, this probably isn't a great pickup. But if you're only focusing on maybe 1 or 2 summons on elemental generation and want a great payoff for it, then this is really nice if you have 2 or more of the elements, because I'm happy with an attack 5 that does really any of those 2 different things. But in particular, like the curse wound is very potent. And even the pierce 2 is nice, because pierce 2 is so relevant by level 8. Monsters are usually going to have shields at this point. Initiative at 27 here is awkward for the bottom half primarily, and is definitely a big knock against the fact the bottom action needs to go as quickly as possible as it is a defensive ability. Overall, this is very much par for the course for this class. You have 3 cards that can go very quickly at any levels. The rest of them are all thoroughly quarter speed or much slower. So overall, not the end of the world, but definitely pair the bottom with a faster card should you use that side of it. So as mentioned, the bottom is grant one of your summons a teleport 3 and 1 shield for the round. All adjacent enemies suffering 1 damage and gain a muddle if you consume the dark with this. So the shield is mostly going to go to waste if you don't do this fast enough. The teleport 3 just by itself isn't really worthy of the action for a level 8 card. So really you got to leverage either the shield and or the dark ability here to really make this worth it. The true damage in Muddle is pretty nice, and synergizes well with something like the Rock Colossus, giving them a shield, muddling them so that they have disadvantage, don't back up, take that retaliate from the Rock Colossus. So I do wish this was a little faster, because the top is fairly niche, and the initiative definitely does not help the bottom, which I think would generally be the strongest part of this card, but definitely held back by the shield potentially not doing much in our given round. Other option here at 8 is Otherworldly Rage. It's another command. Grant one of your summons an attack +2, wound, poison that gives an experience. This is huge. As an attack +2 wound poison represents something like 4 to 6 damage on pretty much any summon, and even more so on some of your damage dealing summons. Wound poison on top means allies can mop up quickly if that target does survive. This will represent a ton of damage every rest cycle. Also combos very nicely with any summons that produce multiple bodies, such as the Slime Spirits or Shadow Wolves, as those kind of summons really do appreciate poison before they attack to multiplicatively increase the damage they deal through the multiple bodies. You even now have bottom attacks and commands to lay the hurt on even more from the poison. Deceptively simple but powerful ability. Wound and poison are both fantastic offensive negative conditions to apply. Initiative at 35 here, just like Masteries 27, is definitely awkward, although in a weird sense, this is more fine for Otherworldly Rage, whereas the bottom of Mastery desperately needs to go quickly. An attack command is okay going moderately fast, and this is actually a better fast initiative than pretty much any of your other commands on offer thus far, so at least there's that. I'm still not happy about a 35, but it's better than like a 51 that we've seen before. A 40, a 60, even an 80 is harder to utilize on an attack command. So this is the bottom really doesn't care at all. So this is a fine number, if a little unexciting. Bottom loss here, recover 1 card from your loss pile that has a summon action. Immediately play that card to perform the summon action. Any summons summoned by that action gain ward, invisible, and strengthen, and then you also turn invisible yourself. This is quite a doozy of an ability. It's similar to Unending Dominances from level 1. However, you get to perform the action immediately, and most notably, this is a bottom action, so again, you can command that summon or something like that right away. It makes both level 9s a little better, because this is a really easy way to rebuy them, because both level 9s have a summon on the top half of them. This is just really, really fantastic. Combination of ward, invisible, and strengthen means that someone's living. Even when it does get hit, it's probably surviving a hit or two, and you get to strengthen, so you can really lay the hurt on them. I'm excited to try this out with the area attack command from level 2 with the strengthen, and just really blow something up. So for the level 8 choice, I think Otherworldly Rage is going to be more of a default pick, because I think it has a fantastic top and bottom action with a mediocre but fine initiative. None of the commands have had great initiatives, so this isn't surprising. Whereas Interplanar Mastery's top is quite niche. You want to be consuming 2 or more of the elements. It's an attack coming from you, which we've had a bit of, but it isn't necessarily the focus of this class. And the bottom is a great action that is held back by both needing the dark as well as having a poor initiative. You're essentially going to want to pair this with something in the 10 to 15 range almost exclusively. We've only had 3 of those on offer thus far, one of which being a level 6 you may or may not have taken. So overall, I think Interplanar Mastery is probably leading towards an interesting sub-build for this class, but by and large, I think many Soul Tethers will be excited for Otherworldly Rage for both halves. At level 9 here, our first option is Horn Nightmare, so summon Prismatic Unicorn. The unicorn does return. Definitely triumphant, I might add. This was a very fun level 9 in first edition, and I think it's mostly just received generally buffs, I would say, in this version. So it's one of 2 level 9 options, again, both being summons, so you're really going to want to pick based on that, although I think both bottom halves have some merit here as well. So this guy has got 8 health, 4 move, 3 attack, 2 pierce implicitly, and at the end of each of its turns, it produces a fire, wind, or dark. Um, so this is obviously a great little value engine here. It attacks, it pierces, it moves, it has enough health to survive probably a hit or two at level 9. And of course, it makes one of your 3 key elements. And of course, this pairs so well with your 3 summons that need those elements, or even if you need that element yourself. Tons of value packed here. This looks great and has played well previously. It gained a couple points of health and this new elemental ability here, and it lost a point of pierce. So overall, I think a positive trade here. I love the elemental generation. I love that it works so well with the new version of Soul Tether, and I think this card's great. Initiative at 80 here is definitely awkward, tiny bit too fast to guarantee going last in a round against some monster types. I think a common play pattern with the Unicorn will be to play it as your leading, or not as your leading card, but rather with a slower leading card on the first turn, probably a support-oriented bottom summon. So you do Unicorn top and then that summon bottom. You have 3 bottom summons at this point to pick from. Most likely the Ember Sprite synergizes very well at the top. Unicorn producing fire for it, something like that. Bottom here is a teleport 6. We skipped right past 5. We've only ever had teleport 4s before this. Teleport 6 is fundamentally massive and allows you to do some fun shenanigans with walls. Although I do think the top half is powerful, splashy, and fun, so this will probably be reserved for situations where you need the big movement early on and probably summon the unicorn in like the back 2/3 to half of the scenario or something like that. Other option here at level 9 is Imposed Will. This is a summon Fey Subjugator. This guy, very cool art by the way, has 4 health, 2 move, a mass of 4 range, 1 attack, and is flying. So the crux of it's going to be on its unique ability. Whenever this summon attacks a normal or elite enemy, after the attack ability, control that enemy to perform an attack -1. So you use the monster stat sheet with this ability. So it may not look particularly impressive at first, but for a level 9 card, this will often range from an attack 3 or 5 that you're performing with the monster, which is really nice. Of course, range 4 makes this very safe, and this really pops off with any attack commands you can give the Fey Subjugator, because of course, whenever it attacks, you get the mind control ability again. Tons of damage from a safe distance. Range 4 is insane. This thing is going to be hard pressed to ever die, barring like a range 4 retaliate from a flame demon. So really, this is such a cool value engine, very different summon than the rest of them. Elemental agnostic, which is kind of nice, and just very powerful and fun, and very much like a mini Mind Thief on the battlefield every turn, which is really cool. Initiative at 98 here is as late as we're going to see in a Haven game, barring more Blinkblaven style shenanigans they might pull on us at some point. Perfect summoning initiative because both halves are persistent losses. You're going to see this card, this initiative once generally per combat because you're going to either put up the top or the bottom half and then never see it again. So 98's perfect in those kind of situations. Usually when you're putting up some sort of setup loss in the first round, you want to go slow anyways, and doubly so with summoners. Bottom, as mentioned, is a persistent loss. Whenever one of your summons is attacked, if that summon does not have ward, it gains ward after the attack, and the attacker suffers 1 true damage. Of course, this coming after the attack is awkward exactly once per summon. That summon needs to be able to survive the first hit, and then becomes very hard to kill after that, particularly on something like a Rock Colossus from level 5. This does effectively make your Rock Colossus immortal or close to immortal, as long as it can survive 1 hit and you occasionally heal it up, although of course it does heal itself. So this is definitely more of a niche ability compared to the Fey Subjugator top, but is very powerful when combined with some sort of frontline summon. And it, in theory, with the right setup, perhaps a word first from you to set off the train can keep essentially any of your summons alive, barring your 2, 3, or 4 health ones, really. So very cool. The true damage is kind of thrown in there, incidental, but does make this feel a little bit more worth it for level 9 loss, because then you're at least contributing to damage in some way as well. So for level 9, I've taken the previous version of Unicorn before and been generally happy with it. The health boost is definitely welcome. 6 health was a little too low before, although it really does output the damage. So again, very much that protect the queen style gameplay we've seen with the Jellyfish, the Spear, the Void Eater, a bunch of the cards in this class. The Teleport 6 is fantastic and definitely build enabling, although this class really doesn't need that kind of movement all that often. It's so nice to have that in your back pocket should you do need it. Whereas Imposed Will is brand new, very cool top half ability I'm very excited to use. Bottom half is also neat, and I definitely want to see some Rock Colossuses survive like a whole freaking scenario, no problem with this kind of ability, just from how powerful this permanent ward is effectively, as long as he can survive once. So I think both halves of Imposed Will are pretty fun here. So that'll be the card I'm taking when I get to 9 on this class. But overall, that's mostly because it's new and I've played with the Unicorn before. Although the Elemental Generation is definitely new and quite exciting here. Perks and Masteries here, the website I normally use didn't actually have the sheet for this or the character mat, so I've taken photos for both of them, so hopefully it's easy enough to read. I tried my best there. So for the first perk for 8th Sir Soul Tether here, replace one -2 with one 0 card. This essentially removes another null from your deck because you're making a lot of attack 2s on this class, both with your summons and yourself. So this is a great early pickup. The next one you can take 3 times. Replace one -1 card with one 0. After the attack ability, grant one of your summons a teleport 2. These have been really nice for us for repositioning summons, safely dashing your summons away from danger if they didn't kill their target. Also a fairly early pick in my opinion. Done a ton of work for us, and it was actually pretty funny because we've actually chained these together on certain turns through commands and a lot of summons present to basically move one summon great distances. Often was the Rock Colossus at level 5 or the Iron Horse before that to get them in the right position. Next up, we have 3 of these as well. Replace one 0 card with one +1. Invisible, target one of your summons cards. These are probably an early to mid pick depending. A good way to keep your summons alive. There is some awkwardness there if your first summon draws one and you want to give it to a different summon, as it'll immediately fall off when that summon goes to no effect, which happens right away. Next up is replace one 0 with 2 rolling wound cards. This is an early mid pick for me as well because wound is great and you are deck thinning by replacing a 0 with 2 rolling modifiers. Same thing for the next one, replacing a 0 with 2 rolling poisons. In a similar vein, I view the poison as slightly better because poison stacks to well summoning style builds that make many small attacks each round through their summons. Next up, we have replaced 2+1s with 2+1 curses. This is more of a mid to late pick for me, as the curses are very valuable if you are going the curse-focused build with Void Eater and Tear the Fabric at 6 and 7, but this does come online typically later, so unless you have a lot of people in your party that are already actively cursing, this probably isn't as much of a priority for you, as you aren't actually enhancing the damage of the abilities at all. The next 3 are all very similar, but not quite the same. You can add each of them once, and it's add 1 +2 that makes a fire and a wind, a fire and a dark, or a wind and a dark. You'll want probably at least one of these early on, and then you might wait on the other 1 or 2 depending. You could take 2 of them early on as well, depending on what you need. These are powerful. They make the right elements for your summons and abilities that care about them, and they are +2s, but they don't deck thin in any way by replacing a bad modifier. So they are just adding to the inconsistency of the deck. However, they are good, and I'd argue fairly necessary in a vacuum because this class doesn't produce elements very well. Just having these in the deck means you have some chances to kind of keep that summon that needs that element present, or perhaps get that ability you need for your upcoming card. Next up, we have ignore negative snare effects and add 2+1 cards. This starts off in a pretty reasonable spot. By super late game, once you have the vast majority of your perks, the 2+1s are actually a fairly nominal modifier because a lot of your other perks are often better or similar to that. As you do replace the vast majority of negative modifiers in your deck, you are left with 2 -1s and 1 0, and that is it. So it really does kind of vary. A lot of negative snare effects for classes ends up being personal preference. I'm usually not super high on them. This class does deal with the 2 or 3 curses out of the deck pretty easily because you're flipping so many modifiers. There are some other negative snare effects that are very crippling. One thing to call out is like adding a bunch of -1s to your deck from negative snare effects sucks. So if you're running into stuff like that, this could be fine to take. Just overall not a super high priority for me. As far as the 3 non-attack modifier perks, First one at the beginning of each round, in which you long rest. All of your summons gain 1 shield for the round. This is really nice. Summoners are one of the classes that are most likely to long rest because you still get a large portion of your turn through your summons acting anyways, and giving them a shield makes it a little bit safer to do so without worrying about them dying. Overall, pretty solid perk. Pretty happy that this is an option. Next one, once each scenario during your turn, teleport one of your summons to an empty hex adjacent to you. This is kind of a get out of jail free card. Sometimes, no matter what you do in a round, your summon's going to kind of die and you can see the writing on the wall. So this allows a recall one to try and get him out of dodge. You know, you're probably still taking that hit as a party, but maybe it goes to an ally who can take the hit instead of your summon who definitely can't. So definitely solid for a single perk mark as well. Last one here is our double. Once each scenario, during ordering of initiative, after all ability cards have been revealed, all of your summons gain invisible. In a vacuum, we were really excited for this one, and our our Soul Tether, actually took it and ended up respecing out of it because she was unhappy with it. Um, at face value, this seems like a very powerful ability. The problem is that when you're looking at the ordering initiative, when you have to use this ability, you don't necessarily know how that round's going to go. So you can look at the monster abilities, your initiatives, talk a bit with your allies about what they might have planned for the turn, but you never know exactly how that turn's going to go out until the modifiers are pulled. Maybe that monster dies, maybe that monster's moved positions. So it's hard to know when to pull the trigger on this ability. If it was a single perk mark, I'd be very happy with it. As a double, it is a bit more of a risk because a Soul Tether or Summoner really lives and dies by their perk modifier deck. So improving that to be a high quality as soon as possible is generally going to be the priority for me with these classes. Looking at masteries here, first one here is that in a single scenario, perform 3 different summon abilities before your first rest, and keep those cards in your active area for the entire scenario. So you can't do anything like have it die and then buy it back, something like an unending dominance. That would not qualify. In fact, we've had that situation happen multiple times so far. We've come very close to meeting this scenario, this mastery in multiple scenarios, sorry. But ultimately, there's always been at least one of them that's died, usually right near the end of the scenario. It's been a little bit heartbreaking. But one of the times, our Soul Tether did prevent us from losing the scenario by doing that. So, at the end of the day, you're there to win the scenario. The masteries are kind of secondary. This is very doable with some luck and some preparation. Things like ward, curses, and muddle will definitely come a long way to making this possible. You definitely want to have something like the Iron Beast or the Rock Colossus is one of those 3 to try and frontline damage sponge for the other ones to live. The crux is figuring out how to make it live itself. So healing actions as well, of course, are very necessary for this mastery. Second one we found to be quite easy, very much just are you playing this class kind of mastery. So the next one is very wordy, but perform 6 different summon abilities from your ability cards over the course of the first rounds of 6 different scenarios. This is something you'll want to keep track of, maybe make it some notes in the notes section. But essentially, you have to summon a different summon in the first round of combat in 6 different scenarios. This is easier when done with some of the bottom summons. So you could do the Rift Spirit and the Wolves in one scenario, and then the Rift Spirit and the Wolves at the start of a next scenario, and have each of those count for one of the 6. You can't do this at level 1, as you only have 5 summons. So you'll have to take a summon at level 3 or 4, or wait till 5+ to make this doable. Our Soul Tether got to the right level to take a summon, in this case level 4, exactly in our 6th scenario, summon that Ember Sprite, she was good to go. Really, this is just about teaching you how to play the class properly, not so much a mastery of it, if there would be my critique on it, because it is a little on the easy side. Just need to summon 6 different things in 6 different scenarios, not a big ask. Feels a lot like the Tinkerer one, where you had to play 12 different losses over the course of your career as the class. But overall, Soul Tether's been definitely a high note for us and has played really well with our particular selection of classes that we're playing right now, kind of trivializing the elemental output, which is definitely a big deal when her summons need it. At least the 3 different ones there. And of course, a bunch of your abilities want the elements as well. So I like the kind of fine-tuned elemental focus here. I'm happy to see a class that actually wants wind, because that's been fairly lacking so far in 2nd edition. But next up for these analysis videos, I'll be doing either Sun or Triforce. Really, I'm leaving that up to the community, as I've kind of had mixed people asking for both. So if you really want to be the tiebreaker and vote for sun or Triforce triangles either way. Let me know in the comments or on Reddit when I post this video to Reddit there. But until then, we'll see you next time.